What if the courtroom that was supposed to settle a family fight revealed secrets so shocking that even the strongest ties in the Brown family began to break in real time? What if the truth wasn't just about love, marriage, or loyalty, but also about betrayal, control, and a secret legal battle that no one saw coming? And what if it was already too late for any of them to leave without being hurt by the time the judge asked the last question? Stay with me if you think you know this family, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew. And before we start, I want you to answer this question. If you were in their shoes, would you fight for the truth or do whatever it takes to keep the family safe? The courtroom is colder than I thought it would be. Not physically, but emotionally, like the air itself is full of tension that has been building for years. People sit down on the wooden benches and whispers spread through the room. Everyone's eyes are on the front row where the Brown family is sitting, but they are not all together. Kody is sitting up straight with his back straight and jaw tight. His eyes move around the room, but they never stay in one place for long. It's not being sure, it's thinking. Robyn holds her hands together next to him, and her fingers shake a little. She looks down and doesn't make eye contact, as if even one look could give away too much. Christine sits in a different way across from them. She doesn't move around. She doesn't turn away. Her eyes are steady, almost unshakable, but there is something burning beneath them. Years of anger, silence, and finally reaching a breaking point. Janelle leans back with her arms crossed. She sees everything, not saying anything, not doing anything, just watching. And Meri is in the middle, with an unreadable look on her face, as if she's still trying to figure out which side of this invisible line she belongs on. People don't talk to each other. No longer. Today is not about bringing the family together. Today is about the truth, and the truth can break things apart. The room goes quiet right away when the judge comes in. Papers move around, a gavel hits, and just like that, something very private becomes very public. Let's get started. On the surface, the case seems easy. A disagreement about money, property, and legal agreements that were linked to the family's complicated structure. But underneath that surface is something much more dangerous, a question that no one has had the guts to fully face until now. Who really had the power the whole time? And more importantly, who wasn't included? First up is Christine's lawyer. She speaks in a calm, measured way, but every word has a sharp edge to it. She starts by saying, "This isn't just about property. This is about being open and fair, and whether everyone had the same rights when it came to decisions that affected their lives." Kody moves around in his chair. It's not very obvious, but it's there. Robyn looks at him for just a second. And Christine, she doesn't move at all. The lawyer keeps going, showing documents, timelines, and agreements, each one carefully putting together a picture that seems more like a puzzle than a legal case. Parts that don't quite fit. Choices that were made without everyone being there. Signatures that show up when there may not have been real consent. And then, the first thing happens that changes the mood completely. A piece of paper is put on the table, quietly, but its effects are anything but quiet. The lawyer says this is where things start to get really bad. The camera would zoom in right now if this were a show. On Kody's face. On the flash of something that wasn't there before. Not mad, not angry, fear. Robyn's breathing gets out of whack. She presses her lips together and looks across the room at the document as if she is trying to read it without getting too close. Christine finally moves, leaning forward a little. She has been waiting for this. The lawyer says that the document lays out a financial restructuring, with assets moved, ownership changed, and decisions made. But there is one important problem. Not everyone put their name down. Not everyone was aware. And yet, the decisions were still made. A soft voice spreads through the courtroom. Janelle's face gets tense. Meri looks down and grips the edge of her seat with her fingers. Finally, Kody talks. "That's not true," he says, his voice firm but not as steady as he would like. Everyone knew what was going on. Christine lets out a small breath. Not funny, not really a reaction. Just enough to say, "That's not true." The lawyer doesn't argue right away. She stops instead. And then she asks the question that makes the room feel like it's full of gasoline. "Then why," she says slowly, Do we have proof that important talks happened in private, leaving out some family members? Be quiet. A lot. Dense. Not avoidable. Kody doesn't respond right away, because there isn't an easy answer. Robyn finally says something, and her voice is softer, almost begging. We were trying to keep the family safe. Not everything had to be talked about in a way that would cause problems. Christine moves her head a little, and for the first time, she talks. But there was already conflict, she says. Be calm. Under control. You just didn't want to deal with it. The words are still there. Janelle takes a slow breath. Meri shuts her eyes for a short time, and the judge watches closely. This isn't just about papers anymore. This is about years of choices, power, and voices that were heard and voices that were not. The lawyer steps forward again and pushes even harder. She asks for evidence. And the first name she says changes everything. Christine Brown. Christine stands, not fast, on purpose. With each step she takes toward the witness stand, she feels like she is moving away from the life she used to accept and towards something new and scary but necessary. She sits down, takes a deep breath, and puts her hand on the stand. The oath is taken. The room is quiet again, but this quiet feels different, because everyone knows what she says next can't be taken back. And when Christine looks up and her eyes meet Kody's for a split second, you can see it clearly now. It's not just a legal fight anymore. This is a time for reckoning. Christine inhales slowly as if she's preparing not just to speak, but to finally release years of thoughts she was never allowed to fully express, and when she begins, her voice is calm, but carries a quiet weight that immediately pulls the entire courtroom into her orbit. She explains how the idea of family unity was always presented as something sacred, something unquestionable, but over time she began to notice that unity often meant silence, especially when decisions were being made behind closed doors. She glances briefly toward Kody and Robyn before continuing, describing late night conversations she was never part of, financial plans she only heard about after they were already finalized, and moments where she felt less like a partner and more like an outsider watching her own life unfold without her consent. Kody shifts uncomfortably, his fingers tapping lightly against the table, while Robyn's eyes begin to glisten, her expression caught between defensiveness and distress. Christine's attorney steps closer and gently asks her to clarify when she first realized something was wrong. Christine pauses, her gaze lowering for a second as if she's revisiting a memory she once tried to bury, and then she says it was the moment she discovered a property decision had already been signed and processed without her knowledge. The courtroom murmurs again, and Christine explains how she initially questioned herself, wondering if she had somehow missed the conversation, but deep down she knew she hadn't, because no one had told her, no one had asked her, and no one had included her. Kody suddenly leans forward, interrupting with a strained voice, insisting that everything was done for the good of the family, that not every detail needed to involve everyone. But Christine turns her head toward him, her expression firm yet composed, and replies that when decisions affect everyone, then everyone deserves a voice. The tension sharpens instantly, like a wire pulled too tight, and even the judge leans slightly forward, sensing the emotional weight building in the room. Robyn finally speaks again, her voice trembling as she tries to explain that the intention was never to exclude anyone but to avoid unnecessary conflict. But Christine responds almost immediately, not with anger but with clarity, saying that avoiding conflict doesn't solve problems, it buries them until they become impossible to ignore. And as her words settle, Janelle's posture shifts, her arms uncrossing slightly as if something in Christine's testimony resonates deeply with her own experiences. Meri remains still, but her eyes reveal a flicker of recognition. A silent acknowledgement that this isn't just Christine's story, it's something they have all felt in different ways. The attorney then introduces another document, one that outlines a timeline of financial transfers and property allocations, and asks Christine if she recognizes it. Christine nods, slowly, explaining that she saw it much later, long after the decisions had already been made, and when asked how that made her feel, she doesn't answer immediately. Instead, she takes a breath, her composure wavering just slightly for the first time, and then she says it made her feel invisible. Like her role in the family had become symbolic rather than real, like she was expected to support decisions she had no part in creating, and the courtroom falls into a heavy silence that feels almost suffocating, because sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't loud or dramatic, it's the quiet. Realization that your voice was never truly valued, Kody shakes his head, frustration now more visible, and insists that Christine is twisting the narrative, that she chose to distance herself and is now blaming others for the consequences, but Christine doesn't react emotionally. She simply looks at him with a steady gaze and says that distance doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly, piece by piece, every time someone feels unheard, every time a decision is made without them, every time their concerns are dismissed as unnecessary conflict. Robyn wipes a tear from her cheek. Breathing uneven as she tries to interject again, saying that she always believed she was helping to keep the family together, but Christine gently counters that holding something together by controlling it isn't the same as unity, it's just a different form of division. And that statement lands. Harder than anything said before, Janelle looks down, her expression tightening as if she's connecting dots she had avoided acknowledging. Meri's lips pressed together, her internal conflict now visibly surfacing. The attorney then shifts the focus slightly, asking Christine about specific instances where she felt deliberately excluded, and Christine recounts a meeting where major financial restructuring was discussed without her presence. She explains how she later confronted Kody about it, only to be told that it wasn't the right time to involve everyone, that things needed to be handled efficiently, and as she describes that moment, her voice remains steady, but her eyes reveal the hurt beneath the surface. She says that efficiency became the excuse, and transparency became optional, and that's when she realized the structure of the family had fundamentally changed. The attorney nods and steps back slightly, allowing the weight of Christine's words to settle. Kody exhales sharply, clearly struggling to maintain control of the narrative, and the judge finally speaks, reminding everyone to remain composed and focused on the facts. But it's clear that this case is no longer just about facts, it's about perception, about trust, about whether the foundation of this family was ever as equal as it claimed to be. Robyn leans closer to Kody, whispering something inaudible, and he nods slightly, his expression hardening as if preparing for a more aggressive defense. Christine watches this quietly, her face calm but resolute, as if she has already accepted whatever comes next. The attorney then delivers another question, one that shifts the emotional tone once again, asking Christine if she believes the exclusion was intentional, and for the first time. Christine hesitates, not because she doesn't know the answer, but because she understands the weight of saying it out loud. She looks briefly at Janelle, then at Meri, and finally back at the attorney, and says that intent can be complicated, but patterns are not, and when the same people are consistently left out of important decisions, it stops feeling accidental, it starts feeling like a system, and that word, system, echoes through the courtroom in a way that makes everyone sit a little straighter, because it suggests something far bigger than individual mistakes. It suggests design. Control, structure. Kody immediately objects, his voice rising slightly as he insists that there was no system of exclusion, that everything was done with the family's best interests in mind. But the judge raises a hand, signaling for calm, and allows the testimony to continue. And just when it seems like the truth has been fully laid bare, a single word or detail can shift everything you thought you understood. The attorney takes a breath and then introduces a final piece of evidence for this phase of testimony, a record of private meetings and communications that took place without the knowledge of certain family members. And as the document is presented, the tension in the room spikes again. Christine looks at it, her expression unreadable, while Kody's face tightens and Robyn's eyes widen slightly. The attorney asks Christine if she was aware of these meetings, and she answers simply no, and then the attorney turns slightly, directing attention toward Kody and Robyn, and asks if they would like to explain why these meetings were kept private, and for a moment no one speaks. The silence stretches, thick and uncomfortable, until Kody finally opens his mouth, but before he can respond, the judge interjects, announcing a brief recess, and the gavel strikes, breaking the moment in a way that feels almost intentional, like a pause before something even bigger is revealed. The room begins to stir, people stand, whispers rise again, but the tension doesn't dissipate. It lingers, heavier than before. Christine remains seated for a moment longer, Her gaze distant as if processing everything she's just said, Janelle looks at her, something unspoken passing between them. While Meri hesitates, caught in her own internal struggle, Kody and Robyn stand together. Their conversation hushed but urgent, and as they move toward the exit, Robyn glances back for just a second, her expression filled with something that's hard to define. Fear, regret, or perhaps the realization that things are slipping beyond control, and as the courtroom slowly empties, one thing becomes painfully clear. This isn't just a case about the past anymore, it's about what happens next, and whether the truth that's starting to surface will finally bring clarity or completely unravel everything they've tried to hold together. The courtroom slowly fills again after the recess, but something has changed. Something subtle yet unmistakable, as if the brief pause didn't calm the tension but sharpened it, turning quiet doubts into loud, unspoken accusations. Christine returns to her seat with a composed expression, but her eyes carry a deeper intensity now. Like someone who has crossed a line internally and cannot go back, Janelle walks in behind her, more alert than before, her usual calm replaced with a watchful seriousness, while Meri lingers near the doorway for a moment, hesitating as though stepping back into the room means stepping into a truth she has spent years avoiding. Across the room, Kody and Robyn sit closer than before, their whispered exchange abruptly ending as the judge re-enters, the gavel strikes, and the session resumes with a weight that presses on everyone's chest. The attorney, representing Christine, stands again, but this time her approach is different, more direct, more surgical, as if she knows the next steps will either solidify the case or unravel it completely. She announces that the next phase will involve cross-examination and calls Kody to the stand. And for the first time since the proceedings began, there is a visible shift in power. Kody pauses briefly before standing, adjusting his jacket, his expression controlled but his movements slightly stiff. He walks to the witness stand with a kind of confidence that feels practiced rather than natural, as if he has rehearsed this moment in his mind but cannot fully control how it unfolds in reality. He takes the oath and sits, his gaze fixed forward, avoiding direct eye contact with Christine. The attorney wastes no time, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of pressure as she begins questioning him about the decision-making structure within the family. Kody responds firmly, explaining that as the head of the family he often had to make difficult choices, that leadership required decisiveness, and that not every decision could involve lengthy discussions, his tone suggests justification rather than apology, but the attorney leans in slightly and asks a simple question that cuts through his explanation, whether leadership means equal voices or final authority, and Kody hesitates just for a fraction of a second before answering that it is a balance. But the hesitation does not go unnoticed. Christine watches him closely, her expression unreadable. While Janelle's eyes narrow slightly, picking up on every nuance, the attorney then presents the records of private meetings again, asking Kody to explain why these discussions excluded certain members. Kody shifts in his seat, his composure tightening as he insists that those meetings were necessary to prevent unnecessary conflict, that involving everyone would have slowed progress and created tension. But the attorney counters immediately, asking if avoiding tension is more important than maintaining trust, and this time Kody's answer is less confident. He says that trust was never broken because the decisions were ultimately for the benefit of everyone, but even as he says it, the room feels unconvinced. Robyn watches him intently, her hands clasped together, silently willing him to hold the narrative together. The attorney then changes direction, asking Kody if he believes all wives had equal influence in financial decisions, and Kody responds quickly, saying yes, but the speed of his answer feels defensive rather than certain. The attorney pauses, letting the word hang in the air before presenting a detailed timeline that shows otherwise, highlighting moments where decisions were made without input from Christine and at times without Janelle or Meri. And as she walks through each point, the cracks in Kody's argument begin to widen. He attempts to explain each instance individually, framing them as exceptions rather than patterns, but the repetition becomes impossible to ignore, because when the same explanation is used too many times, it stops sounding like a reason and starts sounding like a cover. Janelle shifts forward in her seat, her attention now fully engaged, while Meri's expression tightens as if she is silently revisiting her own memories and seeing them through a different lens. The attorney then asks Kody a more personal question, whether he ever considered how these decisions made Christine feel, and for the first time his answer is not immediate. He looks down briefly, then back up, saying that emotions cannot dictate every decision, that sometimes difficult choices have to be made regardless of how they are perceived. But Christine exhales softly, shaking her head just slightly, and when the attorney notices, she redirects the question, asking if Kody believes emotional impact is irrelevant in a family structure. Kody quickly corrects himself, saying it is not irrelevant but cannot be the primary factor, and the attorney nods slowly, as if guiding him towards something he does not yet see. Then she introduces a new piece of evidence, one that shifts the entire tone of the room, a recorded statement from a prior private discussion, and although the full recording is not played, a transcript is presented, highlighting a line where Kody refers to certain decisions as needing to be managed. Carefully to avoid resistance, and the phrase lands heavily, the word resistance echoing in a way that suggests opposition rather than collaboration, Kody's expression changes instantly. His composure slipping just enough to reveal discomfort, he tries to explain that the term was taken out of context, that he was referring to logistical challenges, but the attorney presses further, asking what exactly he meant by resistance and whether it referred to specific individuals. The silence that follows is thick and suffocating. Robyn's breathing becomes more noticeable, her eyes darting between Kody and the document, while Christine leans back slightly, as if absorbing the moment she has been waiting for. Janelle glances at Meri, and for a brief second, something passes between them, a shared realization. The attorney continues, her tone now sharper, asking Kody if he believed certain wives were more difficult to manage than others, and Kody immediately objects, saying that the wording is misleading, that he never viewed his family in such terms, but the damage is already done. The implication hangs in the air, unavoidable, undeniable, and just when someone thinks they've explained everything, one hidden detail can expose the truth they were trying to keep buried. The judge intervenes briefly, reminding both parties to remain focused. But even the judge's voice carries a hint of curiosity now, as if the case has revealed layers no one initially expected. The attorney takes a step back, then delivers another question, one that shifts the focus toward Robyn, asking Kody whether Robyn was present in the majority of these private discussions, and Kody hesitates again before answering yes, that she was often involved because of her perspective and ability to help mediate decisions. The attorney nods, then asks if that effectively gave her more influence than others, and Kody quickly denies it, saying that influence was equal, but the contradiction is clear if one person is consistently present in key discussions while others are not. Equality becomes difficult to defend. Robyn finally speaks up, her voice emotional but controlled, insisting that she never intended to have more influence, that she was simply trying to support Kody and keep the family functioning, but the attorney gently asks whether support should come at the cost of exclusion, and Robyn's expression falters, her response caught somewhere between defense and doubt. Christine watches this quietly, her face calm, but her eyes reflecting a mixture of validation and sadness, as if hearing everything she once felt but could never fully articulate. The attorney then concludes this phase of questioning with one final point, asking Kody if he acknowledges that his approach may have unintentionally created imbalance within the family, and Kody takes a deep breath, his answer slower this time, more measured. He says that in hindsight there may have been moments where things could have been handled differently, but he maintains that his intentions were always to protect the family, and as he says it, the word protect lingers, heavy with meaning, because protection can sometimes look a lot like control. The judge calls for a brief pause before the next witness, and as Kody steps down from the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom feels fundamentally altered. The narrative is no longer as stable as it once seemed. The lines between leadership and control, protection and exclusion have begun to blur. Christine remains still, her gaze forward, but there is a quiet strength in her posture now, as if each revelation has solidified her resolve. Janelle exhales slowly, her thoughts clearly racing, while Meri looks down, her internal conflict deepening with every passing moment. Robyn leans back in her seat, her composure shaken, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and uncertainty, and as the next phase looms, one question hangs over everything, heavier than before, not just what happened, but why it was allowed to happen for so long, and whether the truth that is unfolding will finally bring clarity or tear apart what little remains of the fragile bond they once called family. The courtroom feels heavier than before as the next phase begins, like the walls themselves have absorbed everything that's been said and are now holding on to it, refusing to let anyone escape the weight of it. The judge calls the room to order again, and there's a subtle shift in energy. Not louder, not more chaotic, but sharper, more focused, as if everyone senses that what comes next will cut deeper than anything revealed so far. The attorney rises once more, her movements deliberate, her expression calm but intent, and then she calls the next witness, Janelle, and for a brief moment the entire room seems to pause. Because Janelle has been quiet, observant, steady, but now she is stepping into the center of everything. She stands slowly, smoothing her hands against her sides as if grounding herself, and walks toward the stand with a composed but thoughtful expression. Taking the oath and settling into her seat, her posture upright but not rigid, her gaze direct but not confrontational, and when she begins to speak, her voice is measured, calm, yet layered with a depth that immediately commands attention. She explains that she has always tried to approach the family structure practically, focusing on stability, finances, and long-term planning, and that for many years she believed that was enough, that even if not every conversation included her, the overall direction was still shared, but over time that belief began to fracture. Not suddenly. Not dramatically, but gradually. Through moments that seemed small on their own but formed a pattern when seen together, the attorney nods, encouraging her to continue, and Janelle describes instances where financial updates were presented as final decisions rather than open discussions, where her input was acknowledged but not necessarily considered, and where questions were sometimes met with reassurance instead of answers. She glances briefly toward Kody, then back to the attorney, explaining that reassurance can feel comforting in the moment, but becomes frustrating when it replaces transparency. Kody shifts in his seat again, his expression tightening as if bracing for impact, while Robyn watches Janelle closely, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and anticipation. The attorney then asks Janelle directly whether she felt excluded from key decisions, and Janelle takes a moment before answering, her pause not from uncertainty, but from careful consideration, and then she says that exclusion is not always obvious. Sometimes it feels like being included just enough to believe you have a voice, but not enough to actually influence the outcome. And the clarity of her words lands heavily in the room. Christine's gaze softens slightly, as if hearing her own experience reflected through a different perspective. While Meri's expression shifts again, her internal conflict becoming harder to hide, the attorney presents a series of financial records, asking Janelle to walk through them, and as she does, her analytical nature becomes more evident. She points out inconsistencies, timelines that don't align, and decisions that appear to have been made before full discussions took place. Her tone remains calm, almost clinical, but the implications of what she's saying are anything but neutral. Because when emotions are set aside and facts are laid out clearly, the truth becomes harder to deny and impossible to ignore. Kody leans forward, attempting to interject, but the judge signals for him to wait, and Janelle continues, explaining that she initially trusted the process, believing that even if she wasn't present for every discussion, the decisions were being made collectively in spirit. But over time that trust began to erode, not because of one major event, but because of repeated moments where she realized the outcomes were already determined before she was consulted. The attorney asks her how that realization affected her, and Janelle exhales slowly, her composure holding but her voice carrying a subtle weight. She says it made her question her role, not just in decisions, but in the family itself, whether she was truly a partner or simply part of a structure that no longer functioned the way it once had. Robyn shifts uncomfortably, her hands tightening in her lap, while Kody's expression grows more defensive. The attorney then pivots slightly, asking Janelle about the private meetings that were discussed earlier, and whether she was aware of them at the time. Janelle shakes her head, saying she was not, and that learning about them later created a sense of disconnect that was difficult to reconcile. She explains that it's not just about being left out of a meeting, it's about what that exclusion represents. A lack of trust, a lack of openness, and a shift in how decisions are made. The attorney nods and then asks a more pointed question, whether Janelle believes certain voices carried more weight than others. And Janelle pauses again, her gaze briefly meeting Robyn's before returning forward. And she answers carefully, saying that influence is not always assigned. Sometimes it develops through proximity, through being present in key moments, through having access to conversations others are not part of, and while she does not directly accuse anyone, the implication is clear. The room feels tighter, more constrained, as if every word is narrowing the space for denial. Kody finally speaks up, his tone controlled but strained, insisting that there was never intentional favoritism, that every decision was made with the intention of benefiting the entire family. But Janelle responds calmly, saying that intention and impact are not always the same, and that even if the intention was fairness, the outcome did not always reflect it. The simplicity of her statement cuts deeper than any accusation. Christine nods slightly, almost imperceptibly, while Meri looks down, her thoughts clearly shifting. The attorney then introduces another document, one that highlights a specific decision where financial resources were reallocated without Janelle's prior knowledge, and asks her to explain what she sees. Janelle studies it briefly before speaking, her tone steady as she outlines the sequence of events, pointing out that the decision appears to have been finalized before any broader discussion took place, and when asked how she responded at the time, she admits that she questioned it, but was reassured that it was necessary and temporary, and that pushing further would only create unnecessary tension. The attorney asks if she accepted that explanation, and Janelle gives a small, thoughtful nod, saying that at the time she did, because she believed in maintaining stability, but in hindsight she sees it differently. She sees it as a moment where her concerns were acknowledged but not addressed, and that pattern repeated more than once. And sometimes the most painful realization is not what happened, but how many times you chose to accept it before recognizing the truth. The courtroom falls into a reflective silence. Even the judge seems to absorb the weight of her words. The attorney then asks Janelle one final question, whether she believes the structure of the family changed over time, and Janelle answers without hesitation this time, saying yes, that what once felt collaborative gradually became centralized, that decisions once shared became decisions managed, and that the shift was subtle enough to go unnoticed at first, but significant enough to alter everything. Kody shakes his head, clearly disagreeing, but he doesn't interrupt. Perhaps realizing that doing so may only reinforce what is being said. Robyn's eyes glisten again, her expression caught between defense and reflection, as if she is beginning to see the situation from a perspective she had not fully considered before. The judge nods and signals the end of Janelle's testimony, and as she steps down from the stand, her composure remains intact, but there is a quiet finality in her movement, as if she has said everything she needed to say. Christine watches her return, a silent understanding passing between them, while Meri remains still, her internal conflict now more visible than ever. The courtroom shifts again as the next phase approaches, the weight of two testimonies now hanging heavily in the air, shaping a narrative that is becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. And as the attorneys prepare to continue, one question lingers more strongly than before, not just about what has been revealed, but about what is still hidden, and whether the next voice to speak will confirm the pattern or expose something even more unexpected that no one is fully prepared to hear. The courtroom settles into a tense stillness as the next name is called, and when Meri hears it, there's a visible hesitation in her body. Like a quiet internal battle playing out in real time, she exhales slowly and rises from her seat, her movements careful, almost deliberate, as if each step toward the witness stand carries the weight of years she has tried to reconcile within herself. She takes the oath with a steady voice, but her eyes reveal something deeper, something unresolved, and as she sits, there is a noticeable shift in the room, because Meri has always existed in a space between loyalty and distance, between being present and feeling disconnected, and now she is being asked to define that space out loud. The attorney approaches with a softer tone at first, almost as if recognizing the complexity of what Meri represents in this situation, and begins by asking her to describe her role within the family over the years. Meri gives a small, thoughtful nod before answering, explaining that her role has evolved more than most people realize, that in the beginning she felt deeply connected, involved in decisions, emotionally invested in the structure they were building. But over time, that connection began to shift, not suddenly, but gradually, until she found herself existing more on the edges rather than at the center. Her voice remains calm, but there is an undercurrent of something heavier, something she has carried quietly for a long time. The attorney listens carefully and then asks her directly whether she felt included in major decisions in recent years. Meri pauses, her gaze lowering for a moment as if choosing her words with precision, and then she answers in a way that feels both honest and guarded, saying that inclusion can look different depending on perspective, that sometimes she was informed, sometimes she was consulted, but not always involved in the way she once was. And the distinction she makes is subtle but powerful, because being informed is not the same as having influence. Kody shifts slightly in his seat, his expression tightening as if he senses where this is going, while Robyn watches Meri intently, her eyes searching for reassurance, for alignment. The attorney then presents the same timeline of decisions and private meetings that were discussed earlier and asks Meri if she was aware of them at the time. Meri studies the document briefly before shaking her head, her answer quiet but clear, and when asked how that made her feel, she hesitates again. Longer this time, her composure wavering just enough to reveal the emotional weight behind her words. She says it made her feel uncertain. Not just about the decisions themselves, but about her place in the process, whether her voice still carried the same value it once did. And as she speaks, the room grows quieter, more focused, because Meri's perspective adds a new layer to the narrative, one that is less direct but equally impactful. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come from the loudest voice, but from the one that has been silent the longest. Christine watches her closely, her expression softening slightly. While Janelle leans forward just enough to show that she is fully engaged, Kody finally speaks, his tone measured, but firm, saying that Meri chose to distance herself, that her reduced involvement was not a result of exclusion, but of her own decisions. And the statement hangs in the air, sharp and pointed. Meri turns her head slightly toward him, her expression calm, but with a flicker of something deeper. And when she responds, her voice is steady but carries a quiet strength. She says that distance is rarely one-sided, that it often grows from a combination of choices and circumstances, and that it is easy to label it as a personal decision without acknowledging the environment that contributed to it. The clarity of her response shifts the tone instantly. Robyn's expression falters, her confidence visibly shaken, while Kody's posture stiffens. The attorney steps in again, guiding the conversation toward specifics, asking Meri about particular instances where she felt her involvement had changed. And Meri recounts a moment where a significant financial decision was presented to her as a completed plan rather than an open discussion. She explains how she initially accepted it without question, believing that pushing back might create tension she was not prepared to handle. But over time, she began to see that those moments were not isolated, that they formed a pattern that slowly redefined her role. The attorney asks her why she didn't challenge it more directly, and Meri takes a breath before answering, her honesty now more evident. She says that sometimes it feels easier to adapt than to confront, especially when the structure you are part of no longer feels as stable as it once did. And her words resonate in a way that feels deeply human, not accusatory, not defensive, but reflective. Janelle nods slightly, as if understanding that perspective all too well. Christine's eyes lower briefly, her expression thoughtful, while Robyn looks increasingly unsettled, as if the narrative she believed in is beginning to unravel in ways she did not expect. The attorney then shifts focus again, asking Meri whether she believes all voices in the family were treated equally. And Meri pauses, her hesitation more pronounced this time. Because this question carries more weight than the others, she glances briefly at Kody, then at Robyn, and finally forward again. And her answer is careful but clear. She says that equality is not just about intention, it's about experience. And that while the intention may have been there, the experience was not always the same for everyone. The statement lands heavily, reinforcing what has already been suggested, but not fully confirmed until now. Kody exhales sharply, clearly frustrated, while Robyn's eyes fill with emotion. Her composure slipping further, the attorney then presents another piece of evidence, a record of communication that suggests certain decisions were discussed and refined multiple times before being shared with the broader family, and asks Meri if she was part of those earlier discussions. Meri shakes her head again, her answer consistent, and when asked what that indicates to her, she responds with a quiet honesty that cuts through the room, saying it indicates that some decisions were shaped before others had the chance to contribute, and that realization changes how those decisions feel when They are finally presented, and sometimes the hardest truth to accept is not that something happened, but that it was allowed to happen over and over again without being questioned. The courtroom feels heavier than ever now, the combined testimonies creating a narrative that is becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence or misunderstanding. The attorney then asks Meri one final question: whether she believes the structure of the family shifted in a way that affected trust, and this time Meri does not hesitate. She says yes, that trust is built on openness and shared understanding, and when those elements begin to fade, the structure itself begins to change, even if no one acknowledges it out loud. The judge nods slowly, absorbing the weight of her statement, and signals the conclusion of her testimony. As Meri steps down from the stand, there is a sense of quiet finality in her movement, as if she has finally given voice to something she has carried for far too long. Christine watches her return, a subtle but meaningful connection passing between them. Janelle leans back, her expression thoughtful, processing everything that has been revealed, while Kody sits rigidly, his frustration now more visible than ever, and Robyn remains still, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotion that is difficult to define. The courtroom settles again, but the atmosphere is no longer the same as it was at the start of the day. The testimonies have reshaped the narrative, turning what once seemed like isolated concerns into a pattern that demands attention, and as the attorneys prepare for the next phase, one question lingers more strongly than ever, not just about what has been revealed, but about what comes next, because the truth is no longer hidden, it is unfolding in real time, and whether it leads to resolution or further division is something no one in that room can yet predict.